Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I was musing on a few different things. One of them is the situation in which my brain starts playing the greatest hits track of adverse interactions with other humans, times that I felt disrespected or not honored or not heard or not seen, or someone was in a power struggle with me that I felt like was really unfair, or someone treated me in a way that I really didn't like. And this kind of blended together in my musing as my mind bounced around with a session I did recently with a client I absolutely adore. She asks really good questions in her shamanic healing sessions. And another conversation I had with a young man in a sauna in Whitehorse. And one of the overarching themes of this that I think is really important, and the goal with this is to ideally get out of ruminating on the old times that people have stepped on our toes. It's great to do that, and to notice the good things that are happening to us, because we just didn't get the hardware in our brain descended from hunter-gatherers to be most likely to notice the mildly advantageous things. Neuroscience tells us that we're way more upset about negative experience of the same caliber than we are happy about a positive experience. So you can take the example that if someone loses a $20 bill, the emotional response is going to be bigger in the negative way than the happiness if they happen to find a random $20 bill, lying on the street unclaimed. So I'm all about using tips and techniques from the guides and neuroscience and shamanic journey and intention setting to hack ourselves in ways that are super elegant and efficient. Because I don't want us to have ways of reckoning with this mind that's a little bit predisposed to take offense where none is tended, remember slights, ruminate on slights, these adverse things that really undermine our happiness and turn into energy leaks and have us having more stress with engaging with the world than necessary. But in freeing up that energy, I don't want the remedy to be worse than the cure, for it to take so much more energy that it ends up not passing a worth it equation. So that's kind of the approach I take. So one of the things that runs through as a thread through my experience, the conversation with Sauna Guy, with the client that I was talking to, is noting that humans are really bad at statistics and we're really good at dramatic experiences. So this is just a really interesting and worthwhile kind of thing to note. And I've had this come up for me recently. I was getting my annual mammogram, and for me, the right choice is to go in and have that procedure. I know not everybody resonates with that, but that feels really right and correct and aligned for me. And at the same time, I've had a couple of years where they wanted to have me come back and do an ultrasound just to look at something, and it's always been fine. They've released me immediately after that. But we represent cancer, especially breast cancer, in such a dramatic way in the world that I just noticed myself really kind of having some anxiety, having some tension about it. One of the performers I really like was talking about, being in the room with his wife and his infant daughter was asleep, and he was having the new parent desire to just go check on her, make sure the baby was still breathing. And his wife was like, "No, don't do that. Let's finish the movie, because, if you go in there, you're really likely to wake her up, and then she'll be screaming and crying. And if she is dead, our lives as we know it will crash down around our ears. So, no reason to find this out immediately." And this, was a situation where everything was safe and right with the child. It wasn't parental neglect. But he was just noticing the kind of humor of that. And yet I found myself, when I realized I was overdue for my mammogram, sort of waiting to schedule it until after I got back from a big trip, just to make space that it didn't ruin anything if it turned out not to be the news I was hoping for. And then I Googled the percentage of a possibility that I would have breast cancer as a woman in my 50s, and it came back as 2.4%. And once I knew the statistic, I felt a lot more chill about, yeah, this is all going to be okay. And so it's just interesting that, these dramatic stories, how it's represented in Hollywood, can kind of get into our heads in a weird way. And I know the intention of breast cancer awareness is really positive. It's meant to encourage people to do things that are important but not urgent. However, I also think that the way humans work, some demographic, could be scared straight, and other demographics, when there's fear or activation or emotion, it's a lot easier to avoid. So when I have a dentist appointment, I notice my dentist starts sending reminders like the week before, hey, confirm that you're going to be here. And then like the day before, so the week before, the day before, the day of, because I imagine that there's a disproportional percentage of people who have some feelings about the dentist who, quote unquote, manage to forget, truly, legitimately, it goes out of their head and they're like, oh my goodness, I'm not unreliable in this way. So they have this like extra system of many, many reminders to help people keep, the schedule that they've agreed to show up on. And I was preparing for the general checkup today, and I was just noticing that of all the times that I've had my blood drawn, I had one experience on one occasion where I don't know what was going on with the woman. It was a really weird interaction where she was having trouble finding a vein. She kept sort of asking me, well, it seems like you have scar tissue. What's wrong with that? And I'm like, I don't know anything about that. I know that sometimes, if I put a warm compress on my arm, that can help bringing the veins to the surface, but I'm just not sure. I don't know how to help you. And she kept asking and asking. And when I answered with exactly the same information, I'd given before, she said, well, I heard you the first time. And I'm like, oh, it really put me on my back hill because, I value communication and being a good listener. And I went and gave them my urine sample. And as I was coming out, I heard her doing exactly the same thing to the next person that she had lined up. And when I sort of deconstructed the conversation, I'm like, oh, she keeps asking the same question, hoping to maybe elicit a different response, and then getting peevish about people not listening to her. And I don't know what the deal was, but I noticed that even though this was a couple of years ago and a one-time thing, like the rest of my healthcare providers have all been lovely. And I know it's a mixed bag. Like most people can have good experiences and not so good experiences. But I was strategizing. I was like, well, if it's her, I could ask for someone else. Or if she tried that again, I could be prepared to say, you keep asking the same question like you want a different response, and I don't know what to say to this. I'd really like someone else to take my blood because I certainly didn't want emotional tension with somebody who was going to stick me with a needle. And the truth of the way it played out was easy peasy, super smooth, very skillful man, in and out really fast, very, very elegant kind of experience, which actually is more usual for me. So it wasn't that I was particularly dwelling on this, but there was this little bit of association when I had just a little tiny bump. I'm not going to describe this as a massively adverse experience, but my mind was already kind of running ahead to how I was going to deal with it or what strategy I was going to have. And I think that when we get just a little bit of stress, it doesn't have to be big stress, but just a little bit of stress. I'm not phobic about needles. I don't hate the doctor's office. I haven't had huge adverse experiences, but that little bit of activation kind of makes the brain start going into overdrive and projecting possible difficult scenarios and being prepared to deal with them. And that's kind of an energy leak. It's a really common one. It can come up in any area of our lives of, this person might have this weird reaction. And gosh darn, humans throw weird reactions at us all the time. And so a lot of interactions go really, really smoothly, but some of them have that kind of bumpy element. And so the conversation I was having with the guy in the sauna was about how much more likely people are to write a negative review than a positive one if they come away from an experience. So sure, if you have an exceptional experience of being supported, you might write a review. But gosh darn, if you feel like you were done wrong by that auto mechanic, or, that restaurant waitress was short with you or whatever, it can be really easy to be fueled by your fury to jump online and punish the offenders with reviews. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about my practice is I haven't set up anything with reviews. And a big part of that is I really want anyone who decides to work with me to go to their own intuition, to have a direct experience, listen to my podcast, read my articles, read what I'm offering, and see if it resonates for them. So obviously, if I wasn't, generally making people happy, a lot of my business is, returning people. But I felt like the people who were compelled enough to write a review might be someone who just really had an exceptional experience and a particular perspective that was their own, and the comparison thing can be really problematic. So for better or for worse, I don't set up my business to have Yelp reviews. So in the course of 25 years, there have been two people who were so frigging miffed at me that they actually went to my book on Amazon to vent their "she is a terrible person," opinions about me, which on one level was funny, on another level didn't feel super great, but time and pain can result in humor. So I see the amusement in retrospect, and it's not something I've continued to take so much to heart. But it's really worth noting the information that we receive, even reading reviews. And I really, really like reading reviews as a way to make discerning decisions. But that can really reflect people being heightened in some way. Either they got more than they expected to such a degree that they were compelled to spend the time, or they had a lot of trigger because something didn't go their way. And on a recent trip, I got a some expense paid overnight in Seattle. My flight was delayed, and I had the hotel voucher, which apparently is a very difficult experience. The guy at the front desk was very competent. He he clearly knew exactly what he was doing, and it was just a process that had a lot of steps, which is just not the most fun at 11 o'clock at night when you've been hours and hours and hours of standing in line and delayed and waiting, and finally ended up in a hotel with a potluck of a little tiny toiletries bag, the airline gave you when they said, no, we're keeping your luggage overnight. In fairness, they gave me the option of waiting up to 4 hours to get my suitcase. And I decided that their little toiletry pack would be lovely under those circumstances. But all to say, this guy really was warm and kind, and I really appreciated that. And in moving through the world, especially as a woman, I tend to have an expectation of the energy exchange that people will be competent and courteous if they're in a customer service role. And provided I do my part of the social exchange of being also courteous and collaborative in the experience. But I expect people to, be pleasant about taking my order and things like that. And anyone who is irritated by people asking them for things probably not going to really thrive as a Starbucks barista or a waitress, for example. But I always take human warmth and connection as a generous gift in service people. So if someone not only, takes my order and brings my food, but, smiles in a genuine way or exhibits warmth, or in this case, the guy at the service counter was willing to be compassionate and warm about the fact that I was having a night that was, mildly triggering and annoying. I was not at the high end of Katie happy camperhood. And he was kind about it. So I made it a note to go back and call him out personally as how much I appreciated what he did when I left a Google review, because I, of course, saying, this particular person was doing well is supportive, but I also just genuinely appreciated it. And today when I was in the doctor's office, the nurse that walked me back to the room just had such a warm smile. It totally lit up her eyes. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's so kind that she's generating this greeting for people who, are complete strangers. And so one of the things that I was working with the client I mentioned that I wanted to share with you, because I think what the guides had to say could apply to a lot of other people in all kinds of different places. So it could be related to the medical model, because we're certainly very vulnerable, and the blood drawing person being, I don't know, in this weird, I don't know if it was accidental or deliberate. It was such a weird thing that I don't even have a category of like, where is that person coming from? But when we have people who are participating either with way below average emotional intelligence, or taking out maybe the fact that they don't love their job on the people that they're providing service to, or whatever the case, it's going to be a lot more impactful if you have trouble getting, the care you need, or someone's doing a procedure to your body that's uncomfortable or scary, compared to how it goes in the coffee shop line, for example. So there are certain areas, if you are dealing with the IRS, if you're dealing with a legal system, if you're dealing with, anything that's really high stakes, the impact of someone who, isn't neutral, but is actually negative in some way is going to be a lot greater. But this can really apply to any area of life. So this particular client, who had a great intention for the session, which had to do with updating and getting more contemporary so that she didn't have as much trigger with the medical model, so she could use it effectively and efficiently to support her health, the health of her children, very, very good intention. And we talked about some of the things that happened to her when she was vulnerable as a teenager. And I think it's really useful to remember how much more power the adult voice has. And that was one of the remedies I was sort of unconsciously reaching for, which can be useful if it's sort of like one and done. So like for the teeny tiny bit adverse experience with this, person taking my blood and talking to me in a really weird, almost slightly adversarial way, that just the result of the conversation was sort of moving in a way that put people on their back foot. And I don't know how intentional that was or not intentional, but the upshot was I part of the self-coaching is, I could just ask for someone else to take my blood if this person was there, or if they were participating in this rather odd, loop of conversation that seemed to be their jam. I only have 2 data points. Again, humans bad at statistics. 2 data points might not be significant. But the adult voice has so much more power, and yet we form our opinions and impressions about the world very much as we're growing up. And our brains are actually designed not to update our view of reality unless there's a really compelling reason, because neuroplasticity is calorically expensive, and historically humans haven't had secure access to food. So it was kind of like a wasteful activity from the point of view of the brain. When I was growing up, one of the contentions was whether schools should have enrichment programs like music and chorus and things like that stripped out in favor of reading, writing, and arithmetic. And, what we know about research is, engaging with music actually helps with brain development. So you're going to be better at math if you, also engage with music. And there's also just so much richness of life experience. I like the Winston Churchill quote about, let's get rid of music and art. We're in a serious time. We're in wartime. And his well, then what are we fighting for if not for the beauty of human expression? And I thought that was such a wonderful perspective. Forgive me, I've undoubtedly butchered the quote. But there's a whole lot of experience where we are required to be trapped in particular containers and not allowed to use choice and our voice and things like that when we're in this experience of childhood and particularly adolescence. And the experience where the brain, as, some of these conservative people with a particular bent were saying, forget music, cut music, let's just focus on math, let's just focus on, English scores. The brain's no, accurately representing reality, not the priority, just we want survival and procreation. And the cool thing is, now that most of us have secure access to food, the majority of people on the planet do, we don't have to run our brain in power saver mode, but it is the default. So one of the things that can be really helpful for me, the onboarding of statistical information, oh, wow, it looks like there's only a 2.4% chance of, me being diagnosed with breast cancer as a woman in her first year of her 50s. Okay, cool. Like, wow, I feel really good about those odds, and the statistics actually really helped me in the context of the way my brain had value tagged all of these dramatic stories, the stories of people who've gone through this, all of these experiences. And similarly, we can give our brain the essay assignment, just like as third graders, this was what the guides recommended for this particular client. As third graders, what did you do with your summer vacation? And you were supposed to write about that. And that was a good kicking off point for up-leveling your English skills, ideally in the course of, the third grade training of English. And similarly, we can give our brain adult essay assignments, which are about, for example, I could ask my brain to find all the times that someone was really kind to me in the context of my experiences with the medical model. And I could include the gal greeting people with the warmth of smile, and the times that I was on the phone for 2 minutes and boom, they had an appointment set up for me. And just all of the really needs met kind of things that happened. And as I was sitting in the waiting room, very, very briefly, they have a very smooth, kind of system, I was reflecting on the fact that I'm very much a write your own ticket gal. I really want to curate my life by design. I don't want to conform to structures that would limit my experience. But in that particular moment, I was invested in being very aligned and compliant with the system they set up. Go to the second floor, talk to this person, stand in this line, sit here, wait for the person to come get you. And I was like, okay, I want to understand and I want to, move through. And it really had to do with the fact that I wasn't needing to get anything out of the system that it wasn't already providing, and therefore being collaborative and knowing that they'd put a lot more thought into how to move things through, it would be the most elegant to engage with that. And one of sort of my pet peeves is sometimes people will try to tell me how I should do my practice differently to optimize some kind of boundary that they don't like. And there's so many behind the scenes reasons. It's such a long conversation for why and how I do things the way I do. And it doesn't mean that 5% of the time they might not have a better way that I hadn't thought of, but oftentimes there are a whole bunch of reasons that things are set up in the way that they were. And I was just sort of noticing my flow and my harmonizing with a really set system that was the medical model, which I would do right up until something that I needed wasn't being made available for me. And then I have a whole skill set related to being the squeaky wheel and advocating for myself and finding creative solutions and seeing where else I can move my energy and what else is on the table. So in addition to the sort of essay assignment of times when people were nice to you and needs met and it worked out really well, you can also give your brain the essay assignment about times when you were resourceful and effective at dealing with an obstacle that was really important to your quality of life to address in some way. Because if we go into these systems that feel like authority figures, that feel like they have all the power, that feel like we're at the mercy, sometimes for some people, the very young strategy of be pleasing, avoid displeasing can come to the surface. And given how overtaxed the medical system can be, that can be literally dangerous to your life to be overly nice. Now, I'm all for starting with, really nice and for being kind but firm and knowing that whoever is the gatekeeper between me and whatever outcome is really important to me isn't to blame if they're feeling like they need to stay in the role of the gatekeeper. However, I'm going to use all my resourcefulness to find the pathway around in the most pleasant way possible. I can tolerate friction with other people, but I don't love it. So I often take a strategy that is designed to have as little interpersonal friction as possible while still being willing to tolerate that if need be in order to have an outcome that's important to me. And it can be really uncomfortable when we need to pull a non-go-to strategy out of our back pocket. one of the better pieces of feedback I received actually way back when I was an engineer is I was having trouble getting someone to work with me on a piece of information I needed to move forward with the project. And when I was talking to my boss, I was saying, I'm having trouble with this. And he said, well, your strategy that you like that works for a lot of people is to schedule a time. And I would schedule a time. I'd say, I'm going to come back at this time. He'd say, sure, sure, sure. And then he would be busy and not available. And so I would go away and then try to schedule another time. And that wasn't working. And he's like, well, that doesn't really work with him. So why don't you try the take him by the ear strategy, which is basically the gist of, yep, I know you're busy, but hey, we need to get this done. So, let's do it. If he was really in the middle of fighting a fire, I could come back and try the take him by the ear strategy. But the planning ahead just wasn't a really good, respectful, kind way to deal with this particular individual. It was, show up and, be the urgent thing when he's responding to urgent things so that I could get the thing that I needed to, move forward with the company's vision overall. And it really stuck with me how we tend to have our go-to strategies. For some people, it's I'm going to be ready to call the manager at any moment. And for some people, it's extreme niceness. And, there are all these different kinds of ways that we approach getting our needs met, and having the flexibility to recognize that we may need to divert from our go-to strategy situationally is, I think, a really great thing to have available, have in your back pocket. So when you're doing this kind of mental essay assignment, and it's something you could be on a walk and just kind of be asking your brain to find examples of, and be like, oh, yay, there's an example whenever it pops one up. So it could be like sit down with a piece of paper. You could put it in your notes app on the phone. Writing it down is really helpful. But the self-trust that emerges from knowing that you would be able to advocate for yourself and take care of yourself. And if it didn't go so well in the past, sometimes that next morning review or after game review, they do that in sports. They're like, this play was supposed to go this way. This is actually what happened. What went wrong? How can we do it differently in the future? And healthy corporations have processes like that. Oh, wow, this, bad thing happened. How do we implement more quality checks? Early on in my engineering career, I was writing instructions, and some of that was to keep potential bad things from happening. We didn't want people to, zap themselves on the equipment. And so humans are actually really, really good at the do a thing, get some information. Did it work? Did it not work? What did we learn? And let's pivot. But we really need to kick ourselves into that research and development mode instead of being in the, same approach, same results that, aren't really working for us. And the self-trust of having the capacity to do that situationally, I think, can be really supportive. I think that also, it's really useful to note that our success in moving through the world with other people is going to be a lot greater if we've cultivated a capacity to perceive how we're likely being perceived. So it's looking at the subtle social cues. People may not be really direct with an adversarial person because who wants to, go toe to toe with an angry person? There's some people that's their hobby, and you get two of those together and you can get things really, really volatile. People, weaving in and out of traffic, being mean to each other, or screaming on the side of the road. Again, in Whitehorse at the spa, this one was actually in the hot tub where this man was telling the story of getting quote unquote a speeding ticket and having the rental car impounded for 10 days and, the woes and the expense. And, he was sort of taking accountability and sort of not. He's like, it was educational. Education can be expensive. But the gist of it was he was in some kind of a road rage. He totally blamed it on the other car that resulted in, some sort of driving choices that resulted in, the excessive speed that got the car impounded. But I just thought it was funny to listen to him like, take accountability, deflect accountability, take accountability, deflect accountability. But in my reading between the lines of this situation, which may or may not be accurate, I am certainly imagining that two people, I'm not giving an inch, came together, and how he was socializing with, the collection of people in the hot tub really didn't have that flavor, which was nice. I would have left the hot tub had that been the case. But it's consoling sometimes when we choose not to go toe to toe with a bully, that eventually, generally people don't like bullies, and eventually bullies will find the person who finds it gratifying and compelling to, deal with their undealt with anger issues by, attempting to ruin that person's day as, they move through the world. So it's like, they'll find the mirror for that. I'm just going to go be over here and not be the mirror if there's any pathway where I can, remove myself from that kind of thing. Just because I don't have a nervous system, it would be very expensive for me to get into a shouting match about some stranger's bad behavior in public. And there are other people who would feel like that was a sporting event and, totally agreeable to their nervous system. But I digress. So I just wanted to include in this, kind of aspect where if you're dealing with a situation where you're starting to have, stress or trigger or activation, or I don't know how this is going to go, or you're going to be a little bit off your center, how we can start having that tendency to look at things in a negative way and ruminate on them really get amplified. We start to really, have a brain that gets much louder. My head gets much louder if I'm worried about something or concerned that it would be on an average Tuesday when there was nothing like that. And it can be uncomfortable and more expensive. Like one of the intentions I had today for going in for the checkup was to say, sometimes I can get a little discombobulated, and it's not the end of the world if I'm not super inclined to go above and beyond today on other things that I care about. But I'd actually really like to have the day, the fact that I had to take these 2 hours out of the day to go knock out this important thing. I don't want it to take all the bandwidth for the day and all the energy so that I'm available to move, back into going through the world. So this kind of hack or way of relating to ourselves where we sort of open up our picture of reality to a wider expression and get our brain to update and see the world a little bit more accurately, what we can trust ourselves for, what we can realistically trust or not trust the medical model for, or, whatever it is, how we can work with it. And then really noticing when things go positively for us, when people are extra kind, when things are extra smooth. I really appreciate my current healthcare, how elegant they are. They really think about like how to move people really smoothly and efficiently. And it's a lovely thing. I'm just like, wow, you guys have clearly put a lot of thought into this. And it's really nice to interface with a really well-designed system that allows there to be just a lot of elegance to how services are delivered. One of the people I listen to sometimes, Alison Armstrong, was talking about how as women, when we look in the mirror, we're often scanning for flaws. We're looking for, what do I not like about my body? And there was, I don't remember who it was, but there was some Instagram thing I caught in passing that was just saying, this thing where we look in the mirror all the time is such a weird thing that modern people do because, back in the day, if you had mirrors at all, they were super tiny and you just didn't spend a lot of time in front of them. You might, see a reflection in a pond, but that was pretty rare. You were mostly being reflected by the people around you and as a complete experience. So the staring at yourself in the mirror isn't the experience of your personality and your beingness lighting you up from within, the illumination of your soul. And the rapport that you have with people and the way you engage and how your eyes might sparkle when you talk about something you're passionate about, that's never going to be reflected in this analysis of a unrealistic standard that, kind of gets absorbed by osmosis. And so it was just really interesting to think about this story that women often, if we don't, kind of keep weeding the garden of those thoughts, can really obsess about things that nobody else would even particularly notice or care about. And she was saying that men tend to scan for beauty. And of course, not all men. There are certainly men who have adopted the, hypercritical, let me rank women kind of thing. And there's a lot of toxicity. And if you're in a female body, you may want to steer clear of anyone who wants to, relate information about women of where he feels they fall on a scale of 1 to 10. Like, this is probably some deep woundings and psychological issues, and not great stuff. He may have lovely other qualities, but I wouldn't argue that that's a congruently healthy person who's engaged in that kind of conversation. But I would also argue, and this bears out with my life experience, that I do think most men, when they're looking at women, tend to look for what's beautiful. So if you're looking at a nature scene, it's a little bit different when we're removed in photography, but if you're staring out at a lake and there's a phone line going past it, you might not even notice the phone line because you're so compelled by the beauty of the lake. And if you take a picture, you might see it later. And gosh, modern technology knows we don't love those things. So you could do object removal. It's really cool. Someone was telling me, I'm like, oh, wow, I got a few pictures on my latest trip with my finger over the lens slightly. And they're like, you can remove that. And I'm like, oh, cool. Yay, technology. So there are times when we look at something, more objectively, but in general, I just thought that was such a lovely way to generally recognize people scanning for beauty. And I think it's great to train our minds. And in this case, I'm talking more about scanning for kindness and scanning for emotional generosity. And I just tend to treat the gift of warmth from service providers of any kind as a bonus. Like, I'm not entitled to that. And we could have a whole discussion of unpaid emotional labor and, any time again on the category of if a man is telling women they're prettier when they smile, it doesn't mean he's a bad person, but it does mean that this is probably not a congruently healthy person. And it's probably the tip of the iceberg of some toxic ways of looking at the world and relating that you would save yourself some time if you maybe kept your distance. There's a woman named Jenny Young I really enjoy, and she's got her PhD in rhetoric, and she really talks about how you can do thin slicing, how you can take a little bit of what someone says and look at the things that they're revealing that they don't even realize they're revealing, and then have much higher discernment much sooner in how you end up relating with them. And that is a skill that I just think is gloriously useful. And just to complete or reiterate the thought, again, it's really useful to be aware of what you're putting into the system. So if you're making it more expensive for a server provider to do their job by being obstreperous or unpleasant to them or mean or, putting them down when you don't get your way, I feel like that's a rather egregious harm to walk around sharing in society. And I think there's a general societal consensus that people who are rude to servers are a particular version of reprehensible. So we're really designed to be very anchored in our own experience, but the more we have a capacity to kind of look up and see the impact we're having on others, I think it's a very useful skill. And at the end of the day, people are going to be a lot more collaborative if you collaborate with them and have the skill and the discernment, except when there's a really compelling reason not to. So I know this kind of covered a lot of ground, but I'm just really interested in how doing the really ordinary things that we deal with, dealing with the systems and the interactions with people and where our own brains go, that we have the most advantageous experience possible. Because again, a lot of times we focus on dramatic moments in our lives, and it can be hard to slow down. And one of the things I can really say, compared to last year, it cost me a lot less to go get my mammogram and have the doctor's appointment and give blood. Like, the amount of impact on how much energy or how many spoons I used doing that was a lot less. And that was partly that things were really smooth, but they've been smooth in the past. A lot of it was mindset and relationship to myself and how I relate to other people that really produced that result. And I think it's something that is really worthwhile because those incremental gains really add up in terms of having more bandwidth to engage with the world in cool ways. So I hope something in here is supportive for you, and regardless, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.